I woke to a silence that felt staged, as if the entire house had been ordered to hold its breath. For a moment, I lay still in the dark, listening for the ordinary sounds I had come to expect at that hour. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant rush of early commuters on the highway, even the faint creaks of the house adjusting as the temperature dropped before dawn. But there was nothing, only a silence so sharp it pressed against my eardrums. That silence, more than anything else, made me get up and move toward the window, half expecting to find something out of place. The clock on the nightstand read 5:07 a.m. I remember that exact number glowing in red because I stared at it longer than necessary, as if the digits themselves carried weight. At that hour, Megan was supposed to be asleep beside me, her steady breathing usually a counterpoint to my own. Instead, her side of the bed was cold and the sheets were bunched, evidence that she hadn't just stepped out to get a glass of water. Something in me tightened. I padded across the carpet and moved the blinds just enough to peer outside. A car share pulled up quietly in front of our suburban Denver home. Not an Uber I recognized, just one of those anonymous rentals people used for quick trips around the city. The door opened and out stepped Megan. My stomach sank even before my eyes registered the details. She was barefoot, her shoes nowhere in sight. Her dark blue dress wrinkled in deep creases as though she had slept in it or worn it through a long night. The hem was wet, darker than the rest of the fabric, clinging to her legs as if she had walked through damp streets or grass. Her hair, usually controlled with meticulous care, was flattened on one side and frizzy on the other, a look I had never seen on her even after her longest days. And then my eyes caught the mark. On the side of her neck, glowing against her pale skin, was a fresh streak of red, not wide but unmistakable. It wasn't makeup rubbed off by accident. It wasn't irritation from a necklace or scarf. It looked like the pressure of lips that didn't belong to me. The color was too vivid, too warm. Megan never wore lipstick in that shade, and even if she had, it would not have landed there. She adjusted the jacket around her shoulders and began walking up the driveway. That was when something slipped from her hand. A small rectangle of cardboard fluttered down onto the pavement. Even from a distance, I recognized the design. It was the sleeve of a hotel keycard, the name printed in minimalist font. The boutique hotel on 17th Street, one of those fashionable spots meant for weekends away, not corporate meetings. My mind reached for rationalizations, but each one dissolved instantly. She bent quickly, scooped it up, and clutched it along with a sleek black case I had never seen before. The case didn't belong to her. Its leather was unfamiliar, embossed faintly with initials not hers. I stepped back from the window as she unlocked the door and entered. The smell reached me before her words did. A wave of unfamiliar cologne, rich and musky, sharp enough to clash with the faint lavender of our detergent. It was the kind of scent that lingered in boardrooms or bars, not in our hallway. Megan appeared almost instantly in character, as though she had rehearsed during the ride. Her face shifted into a casual smile, her tone airy, almost cheerful. She said it had been an all-night work session, that the jacket was borrowed because she'd been freezing in the office, that the hotel key was only for a presentation room. She insisted the car wasn't an Uber but a last-minute ride service the company covered. She moved quickly, redirecting every detail as if each was nothing but logistics. But the contradictions screamed louder than her words. The damp dress suggested no office, unless offices now had storm drains running through them. The lipstick stain on the inside of her collar was deeper, bolder than any of her usual neutral tones. She claimed exhaustion from late-night work, yet her phone remained out of sight, tucked away instead of buzzing with congratulatory messages from her team. And that mark on her neck, no amount of quick words could erase its raw, unexplainable truth. She kept the black case close, not setting it down even as she disappeared briefly into the kitchen. Her movements were efficient, like someone shifting the focus of a conversation before it could be challenged. She framed everything as if the real story was simply about corporate chaos and logistical inconveniences. But I could still smell the cologne, see the wrinkle of the jacket, notice the way her eyes avoided mine for half a beat too long. Inside, I felt torn in two directions. One half of me screamed to confront her immediately, to point out every inconsistency, to demand the truth. The other half whispered that I might be overreacting, that marriage required trust, that maybe she was telling the truth in some twisted, exhausting version of reality. I let the second voice win for that moment. I told myself I was tired, that dawn could warp perception, that silence could make suspicions louder than facts. I convinced myself that maybe she really had been caught in a storm of deadlines and bad luck. Still, as I returned to the bedroom, I couldn't silence the images burned into my mind. Megan barefoot in the driveway, the jacket that wasn't hers, the hotel sleeve, briefly illuminated under the streetlight, the black case clutched like a secret, the mark on her neck, the smell of another man's cologne woven into the fabric of her dress. Each detail alone could have been explained, yes, but together they formed a chord too discordant to ignore. A chord that would echo long after the silence of that morning. I lay back down, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow in the room seemed to carry the weight of what I had seen. My mind replayed the scene in a loop, magnifying every detail I wished I could dismiss. Why barefoot? Why that jacket? Why the hotel card? Each question came like a hammer on metal, striking sparks I could not put out. I imagined alternate explanations, tried to stack them in her favor, but the tower collapsed every time. I told myself people borrow jackets, that car shares sometimes drop passengers blocks away, that hotel keys can be reused for meetings. But why at 5:07 a.m.? Why the mark on her neck, still warm with color? No version of the story accounted for that. I lay staring at the ceiling until dawn began to pale the walls. The silence remained, heavier than before, and I realized I had crossed an invisible line. I could no longer believe everything she told me just because she told it. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it would grow whether I wanted it to or not. I tried to push the morning out of my head, to bury it under routines and the simple mechanics of life, but memory is stubborn. Once it plants a seed, it sprouts everywhere. I went to work, answered emails, held meetings, drove home through the familiar routes of suburban Denver. On the surface, nothing had changed. Megan still left notes on the fridge about groceries, still texted me reminders about bills, still made casual comments about upcoming deadlines. But beneath the surface, everything was fractured. The more I told myself to trust, the more the cracks showed. The first fissure was her phone. It had always been something casually left on the counter, unlocked, buzzing with group chats from friends or reminders from her workout app. Now it became a locked fortress. A new passcode, longer than before, replaced the simple 4 digits she used to share without thought. Notifications stopped appearing on the screen altogether, as if her phone had suddenly gone mute. She began carrying it everywhere, even to the bathroom, even to the laundry room, as though the device itself might reveal something if left unattended. Then came the Friday nights. They used to be our nights, takeout, wine, sometimes a movie. Simple rituals. Suddenly, those nights vanished under the weight of investor edits and late-stage reviews. Megan started dressing for the office even on Fridays, pulling on fitted blouses and pressed skirts as though she were presenting to a board. She'd leave with her laptop bag but come back without the fatigue of someone who had just survived an endless revision cycle. Instead, there was a strange energy about her, a buoyancy, a glow in her cheeks I hadn't seen after any true deadline. The gym sessions followed. She logged them meticulously into her calendar, color-coded in bright orange, always in the evenings. But her sneakers didn't move from their place by the door for weeks. The gym bag that once smelled faintly of rubber mats and sweat became nothing but fabric and perfume. I tried to convince myself she was going to a different gym, one across town, but then I saw the receipts. Gas station charges, small but consistent, lined up with those supposed workouts. She wasn't exercising her body. She was exercising a lie. Her coat, once scented only of detergent and the occasional spritz of her floral perfume, began to carry something else. A deep, woody musk I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine. I used fresh, citrus-based colognes. This was darker, older, masculine. It clung to her sleeves and lingered in our hallway long after she shrugged the coat onto its hook. I buried my nose in the fabric once, desperate to prove I was imagining things. But the smell was undeniable. I started noticing objects out of place. A pair of earrings I had never seen before, tucked into the side pocket of her purse. Not her style, thin, dangling pieces with small dark stones, elegant in a way Megan usually avoided. A delicate bracelet, silver and narrow, slid into her cosmetics pouch without packaging or tags. No receipts, no gift bags, no explanations. When I asked casually, she brushed it off as samples from a friend's shop. But the excuse hung in the air, brittle and transparent. Then there were the inconsistencies with time. One evening, when she claimed to be in a meeting, I found a crumpled cafe receipt in her jacket pocket. The timestamp read 7:42 p.m. The location was across town, nowhere near her office. The order was for 2 cappuccinos. When I confronted the paper in my hands, I wanted to believe she had simply grabbed coffee with a colleague, but the lie in her alibi hollowed me out. Over the summer, her habits shifted further. She began taking walks to clear her head. At first, it was plausible. The air in Denver could be crisp, especially near dusk, and walking had always been her way of shedding stress. But the frequency grew. 30 minutes became an hour, then 2. She'd return not with the flush of exercise, but with a subtle, lingering scent of cologne I didn't wear. Each time she re-entered the house, she looked refreshed, almost renewed, like someone returning from a place that filled rather than drained her. Individually, each detail might have been excused. People change routines. Workloads spike. New habits form. But together they stacked like bricks, building a structure I couldn't ignore. Every element reinforced the others. The longer passcode aligned with the new perfume. The Friday nights matched the receipts. The earrings, the bracelet, the walks, the gym sessions. All of it intertwined until there was no way to separate one excuse from another. I found myself cataloging the evidence without meaning to. I kept mental notes of timestamps, smells, objects. My eyes scanned for inconsistencies automatically, like a detective who hadn't meant to take a case, but couldn't help collecting clues. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was pattern recognition. And the pattern was always the same: concealment. One evening, I opened the laundry basket and found the sleeve of a blouse she rarely wore. On the collar, faint but visible under the right angle of light, was a smudge of foundation that wasn't her shade. Darker, almost bronze. Megan had fair skin, and her cosmetics always matched it carefully. This trace didn't belong to her. My chest constricted as I stared at it, realizing how deeply foreign marks had invaded our home. By August, the walls of my denial began collapsing. I tried to rationalize everything, to cling to the hope that maybe Megan was simply stressed, maybe reinventing herself, maybe experimenting with new styles and schedules. But the more I tried to believe, the more the contradictions mocked me. Trust isn't a simple choice when the evidence piles up like this. It becomes a test of how much reality you're willing to ignore. At night, lying beside her, I could hear the faint buzz of her phone under the pillow. She thought I didn't notice the way she turned her body slightly away, the way her thumbs tapped silently while she claimed to be catching up on headlines. Sometimes she smiled at the screen, a smile that never reached me, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the beats of my heart until sleep claimed me against my will. It was becoming clear. I wasn't living with the same woman anymore. Or maybe I had never known her as well as I thought. The fragments of her behavior, once disconnected, were forming a mosaic. And in that mosaic, the image of betrayal was starting to emerge, undeniable and sharp. The suspicions had grown roots by then, spreading through every corner of my thoughts. Still, I clung to the fragile idea that I might be wrong, that I was constructing a phantom out of half-truths and timing errors. That illusion shattered in Boulder. It was supposed to be Megan's team-building retreat, a casual offsite in the mountains, rented shales and workshops framed as strategic bonding. I wasn't invited, of course, but fate has a way of arranging encounters when truth is unavoidable. A contractor I knew through work happened to supply the event space with equipment. He called me the day before, asking if I wanted to drop by and see the layout of the mountain lodge they were using. I said yes without much thought, though inside me a current of curiosity stirred. The day was crisp, the sky sharp and cloudless as I drove into the foothills. Aspen leaves had beg asterisk end to yellow, shimmering like coins in the breeze. The chalet stood solid against the rising slopes, its wood beams dark with age, the windows reflecting jagged peaks. I parked with the contractor's van, blending into the background as staff unloaded supplies. From the moment I stepped onto the gravel, a tension twisted in my chest. I told myself I would only glance, that there was no harm in observing the event from a distance. The gathering was lively. Music played faintly from outdoor speakers. Laughter carried across the yard, where small groups clustered around fire pits. I spotted Megan easily, her figure unmistakable even among the crowd. She wore the same hairstyle she'd left with that morning, her curls arranged in waves that framed her face. Her nails were polished in a pale pink, matching the manicure she'd shown me days before with casual pride. Details like these anchored me, reminded me this was no dream. At first, nothing overt happened. She mingled with colleagues, lifted her glass at jokes, even joined a circle tossing beanbags at a wooden target. But I watched closely, and in watching, the truth unfolded. The way she leaned slightly toward Rick Hale, her director, the one she often mentioned as demanding but fair. The way he touched her elbow as if the gesture were both casual and familiar. The way she laughed at his quips, head tilted, eyes lingering longer than professional courtesy required. When the group shifted toward the main house, Megan and Rick drifted in another direction. I followed at a distance, my steps soundless against the gravel, my heart pounding so loud I worried someone might hear it. They approached a smaller chalet, tucked near the treeline, its windows wide and uncurtained. Light spilled warmly onto the ground, an invitation and a curse. Through those windows I saw everything. A table set for two, plates steaming, wine glasses tilted in a private toast. Their gestures mirrored each other. Leaning in, laughing softly, hands brushing in rhythms that spoke of habit, not chance. Megan reached across the table, laying her hand on Rick's wrist with the kind of ease that only comes from repetition. He covered her hand with his, and in that touch, I saw the truth made physical. Then came the kiss, not hurried or stolen, but deep, deliberate, drawn out. The kind of kiss that speaks of shared nights and whispered promises. My body reacted before my mind did. A cold rush, a tightening of my throat, my palms damp against the phone I clutched. I raised the camera almost mechanically, framing them through the gap in the curtains. The shutter clicked softly, capturing the moment in pixels I never wished to possess. Minutes passed like hours. They laughed again, stood, and disappeared toward the bedroom beyond the dining space. The lights dimmed. Shadows moved across the wall, indistinct but undeniable. My knees weakened, and I braced myself against the trunk of a pine, the bark rough against my palm. The world spun, but the scene inside was steady, merciless. I forced myself to fix the details in memory. The time, just after 9. Her hairstyle and nails matching exactly what she had shown me that week. The patterned scarf she had looped casually around her chair, the one missing from our hallway hook. Every fragment etched itself into me, proof that this was not paranoia. It was reality, naked and unfiltered. I wanted to storm inside, to tear the door open and drag them into the cold night air. But I didn't. Some instinct, deeper than rage, told me that evidence mattered more than outbursts. I took another photo, this one of the chalet exterior with my phone's clock display captured in the corner. Documentation, not drama. My breath came harsh, fogging in the cold, as I watched the lights go out one by one. Eventually, I turned away. The laughter of the larger group carried faintly through the pines, oblivious to what unfolded in the smaller chalet. They toasted teamwork and camaraderie while two of their leaders dismantled the meaning of both. I walked back toward the parking area, every step heavy with a new certainty. Driving home through the mountain roads, I replayed the scene over and over, as though repetition could dull its edge. Didn't. Each pass through the memory only sharpened it. Megan's hand on his, their synchronized laughter, the kiss that seemed to stretch endlessly, the blackness of the bedroom when the final light died. By the time I reached Denver, dawn was threatening the horizon. I parked in the driveway and sat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. There was no more room for denial. The mosaic I had pieced together in my mind was complete, and the image was unmistakable. I stepped into the quiet house, where the walls seemed to hum with the echo of what I had witnessed. The evidence now lived not just in memory but in photographs, timestamps, and the relentless certainty carved into my chest. The suspicion had ended. The truth had a face, a name, and a timeline. And I was left with the unbearable knowledge that my marriage had already crossed a line it could never return from. After Boulder, I couldn't allow myself the luxury of doubt anymore. I had seen too much, and the photographs on my phone burned like coals in my pocket. But vision alone wasn't enough. The part of me that still thought logically, clinically, understood that discovery demanded more than emotion. It demanded structure, proof, a chain that even the most elaborate lie couldn't unwind. So I became an archivist of betrayal. The first step was subtle. I installed a small tracker in Megan's car, no bigger than a matchbox, slipping it into a crevice under the driver's seat, where she would never look. My hands shook as I placed it, not from fear of being caught but from the realization of what I was doing. Marriage was supposed to be trust without surveillance. Yet here I was, turning our life into a case file. Each ping of that device would be a nail, securing truth to the wall. Within days, the pattern appeared. On evenings she claimed late calls or investor revisions, her car parked near the same boutique hotel on 17th Street. The very one whose key sleeve I'd seen drop from her hand. On weekends, she supposedly worked out schedules with colleagues. The tracker led me to a chalet in Breckenridge, the same mountain area where I had witnessed the kiss. It wasn't random. It was rhythm. Steady, deliberate, undeniable. To cross-check, I pulled our joint parking records. She often used corporate accounts for city garages, and the billing statements told their own story. Repeated charges at garages adjacent to the hotel, never filed under client meetings or board reviews. Just charges, consistent with the nights she returned home glowing with excuses. When I overlaid the tracker's map with the receipts, the overlap was near perfect. One morning, I checked the mailbox and found a manila envelope without a return address. Inside was a single printed photograph. My breath caught when I saw it. Megan and Rick on the deck of the Breckenridge Chalet, drinks in hand, standing closer than colleagues ever should. The angle suggested someone else at the retreat had taken it, someone who wanted me to know. Whether it was pity, revenge, or simple chance, I couldn't tell. But it meant one thing. Their int asterisk Macy wasn't invisible to others. I wasn't imagining a secret. It was visible enough to be captured, shared, mailed. The black leather case she had once brought home, insisting it was filled with draft proposals, had been gnawing at me too. I waited until she showered one evening and unlatched it. Inside was a folder stitched with initials. R. H. Rick Hale. My chest tightened as I ran my hand across the embossed letters. Not even an attempt to disguise ownership. I snapped photos of the contents, presentation slides, budget drafts, a schedule for a weekend workshop that coincided exactly with one of her gym nights. The phone records came next. I pulled a detail report from our carrier. Among the usual stream of texts and family calls, one number repeated with mechanical precision. Always in the evenings, always in the windows between her meetings. I dialed it once from my own phone, and a generic voicemail answered. No name, just a voice mailbox. I didn't need a name. I could already guess. Then came the accident that sealed the pattern. One evening, while I was in the living room, her phone rang in the bedroom. She had left it charging, muted. Instead of going to voicemail, an auto-recording system picked up. I heard the background noise. Clinking glasses, laughter, music. And then his voice, clear as a hammer blow. Rick, raising a toast, joking about finally making time away from strategic sessions. No mention of investors, no boardrooms, no deadlines. Just laughter. In asterisk Macy. The sound of celebration in a setting I was never meant to hear. I began to build my archive. I bought a binder and filled it systematically. Screensh asterisk TS of location logs, printed receipts, photos of the chalet, scans of the envelope's contents. Each page slid into a clear sleeve, lined in order, time-stamped. I wasn't sure if I was building a case for myself, for a lawyer, or simply to convince my own mind that this was real. But the act itself gave me clarity. Every sheet of paper was a barrier against her gaslighting, against the smooth way she shifted blame and recast events. What struck me hardest was how mechanical it all became. I woke, I worked, I documented. When Megan smiled at me, asked if I wanted coffee, leaned in with casual affection, I saw her not as my wife but as a subject of investigation. Her gestures no longer carried warmth. They carried data. Even love, when inspected closely, leaves fingerprints. The more I cataloged, the less I spoke. Outwardly, nothing seemed to change. We still shared meals. We still discussed bills, groceries, schedules. But inside me, a gulf widened. I realized how easily life can fracture while the routine continues unchanged. Trust had been replaced by verification, affection by observation. I no longer asked, "Do I believe her?" I asked, "How do I prove what she hides?" Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit at the kitchen table with the binder open, the pages spread like evidence in a trial. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder then, almost a jury deliberating in the background. I stared at the photographs of the chalet, the initials on the folder, the string of receipts. They were lifeless objects, yet each carried the pulse of betrayal. I didn't confront her, not yet. Part of me still wanted to see if the pattern would shift, if maybe she would break under the weight of her own lies and confess. But she didn't. She only grew more polished, more precise in her cover stories. And I grew quieter, more resolved. The roles had reversed. She thought she controlled the narrative, but I was the one holding the script now, line by line. By the end of September, the scheme was no longer a suspicion. It was a structure mapped and documented. Hotel, chalet, tracker pings, phone calls, the anonymous photo, the initials on the case, the toast captured by accident. Together they formed not a theory but a reality. A lattice of choices Megan had made, each one a betrayal layered on the next. And as I sat there, binder closed, pen in hand, I understood something chilling. This wasn't about one affair, one mistake. It was a system, a scheme that repeated itself with such consistency it might as well have been scheduled on her calendar. I wasn't just catching moments of weakness. I was uncovering a rhythm of deception. Once the binder had shape, once the pattern was undeniable, I realized the only way forward was to move from suspicion into certainty. I had collected fragments, but fragments, no matter how many, can still be dismissed as accidents. What I needed was chronology, a timeline that wove each thread together so tightly that even the most persuasive lie couldn't unravel it. Hard verification, facts laid bare. So one Sunday afternoon, while Megan said she was meeting a colleague for pre-read adjustments, I cleared the dining table and spread out every piece of evidence. Receipts, parking records, printouts of the tracker's route logs, **TS of her text history with gaps at convenient hours, even my own photographs from Boulder. The surface of the table became less like a place for meals and more like a crime board, every item a node in a web of deceit. I began by creating a chronological spine. On the left, I wrote the dates of each major excuse Megan had given: late nights, investor revisions, gym sessions, weekend strategy retreats. On the right, I pinned the corresponding data points I had uncovered. For example, on July 15th, she told me she was working on a late investor call. The tracker, however, placed her car in the garage adjacent to the boutique hotel at 9:13 p.m. Parking receipt confirmed the stay. On the same night, a charge appeared on our joint credit card for wine at the hotel bar. These three independent points aligned like coordinates on a map, and the investor call collapsed into fiction. Another evening, she said she was attending an early morning briefing and would be out late prepping. At 7:05 a.m. The next day, a charge cleared for breakfast for two at a cafe in the hotel lobby. The receipt had a note scribbled at the bottom, not in Megan's handwriting, thanking the server for the usual table. My stomach twisted when I read those words. There was nothing unusual about her supposed work. The routine belonged to them. Then there was the so-called gym night. I printed the tracker's route and highlighted the stop at the chalet near Breckenridge. The time matched perfectly with the anonymous photograph I had received in the mail. Megan and Rick on the deck. Casual int asterisk mate. Overlaying those two sources left no margin for reinterpretation. She wasn't lifting weights or running miles. She was building a second life. The most damning discovery came from billing records. While combing through her corporate expenses, I found an entry labeled hospitality package, romantic upgrade. It had been processed 2 weeks before the Boulder retreat. The timestamp aligned exactly with the weekend she told me she was swamped preparing a proposal. I printed the billing confirmation, the line item stark in black ink. No board meeting required a romantic upgrade. The lie was documented by the company itself. Piece by piece, I filled the spine of my timeline. Each excuse collapsed into contradiction, each alibi punctured by a receipt, a location ping, a photograph. What had once been a haze of suspicion became a lattice of proof. I arranged the evidence not only to convince myself but to withstand scrutiny. Legal, professional, personal. I wanted no room for counterargument, no corner where she could pivot and claim misunderstanding. In the process, I noticed something else: repetition. The same nights of the week, the same routes, the same gaps in text history. This wasn't random chance. It was a rhythm. Betrayal, when sustained, leaves patterns like sediment, layers that reveal age and consistency. What I held in my binder was not the record of a slip or fling. It was the architecture of a double life. I typed out a summary almost like a case brief. Each date listed with the official excuse, the supporting contradiction, and the physical evidence. For example, August 2nd, claimed investor dinner. Evidence: tracker ping at hotel, parking garage receipt, bar charge for cocktails, 2 glasses noted. August 18th, claimed gym. Evidence: tracker log shows Breckenridge Chalet, anonymous photo received, matching clothing and hairstyle. September 10th, claimed strategy review. Evidence: phone auto answer recording captures Rick's voice, laughter, background toast. By the time I finished typing, the document ran 12 pages. Felt clinical, detached, almost cruel. But it was necessary. In truth, it was the only shield I had left against her inevitable attempts to shift blame or minimize what I had seen. I printed multiple copies, stored one in a locked drawer, and uploaded a digital version to the cloud under a disguised file name. Paranoia had become procedure. I couldn't risk her discovering it and spinning the narrative in her favor. That evening, Megan returned, humming softly as she set her bag down. She looked radiant, the kind of radiance that once would have stirred warmth in me. Now it only sickened me. I glanced at the binder tucked discreetly back into its hiding place and realized that my knowledge had advanced beyond hers. For once, I was no longer the one left in the dark. The binder became my silent companion. Sometimes I'd sit late into the night flipping through it, each page a reminder that I wasn't insane, that my instincts were not paranoia but perception sharpened by love betrayed. The more I stared at those pages, the more I realized how little Megan's words mattered anymore. Truth was no longer in her explanations. Truth lived in paper, ink, timestamps, and photographs. And yet, part of me still hesitated. Hard verification gave me clarity, but it also left me hollow. There was no thrill in being right, only the ache of knowing that I had been chosen as the one left behind, deceived, replaced. I wondered if that ache was worse than doubt. At least doubt had left a sliver of hope. Certainty K** led it. By the end of the week, the case file was complete. A life dismantled, documented line by line, item by item. I slid the last page into its sleeve, closed the binder, and rested my hand on the cover. It was heavier than it should have been, not with paper but with finality. I didn't explode. Instead, I told Megan that her choices had been made long before I gathered proof. Calmly, I gave her a deadline to collect her things. I'd already met with a lawyer, secured financial accounts, and duplicated the evidence. At work, whispers began about misuse of corporate cards, and to avoid exposure she backed off claims on property. Our talks became logistical, reduced to schedules and boxes. Sorting through closets, I found letters from past admirers tucked away, confirming betrayal wasn't a slip but a cycle. I stayed a few nights with a friend, changed locks, archived the binder, and let silence reclaim the house. For the first time in months, I breathed without checking for lies. On the mirror I left a note: trust is not blindness. Freedom arrived not with rage, but with the stillness of knowing I no longer needed to question.